My granddaughter had been visiting for 4 days when she knocked on my bedroom door at 11 o'clock at night and said, "Grandma, I need you to come with me right now and don't turn any lights on." I thought she'd heard something outside, a raccoon in the yard maybe, or a car idling too long on the street. I was 68 years old and I'd lived alone in that house for 2 years and I'd gotten used to nighttime sounds that turned out to be nothing. So I put on my robe and my slippers and I followed her down the hallway in the dark, thinking this was one of those things you do for grandchildren. You follow them, you reassure them, you make them feel safe. She led me to the kitchen. She sat me down at the table and she placed her laptop in front of me and she said, "Before I show you this, I need you to promise me you won't call Mum or Dad tonight." I almost laughed. I said, "Sweetheart, it's almost midnight. I wasn't planning on calling anyone." She didn't smile. She just turned the screen toward me. I want to back up and tell you about the kind of person I was before that night because I think it matters. My name is Harriet. I'm 68 years old. I taught 4th grade for 31 years at the same elementary school in Roanoke, Virginia, and I retired 2 years before my husband passed. His name was George. He built furniture, not as a business, just as something he loved. Our garage was full of his tools and wood shavings and half-finished projects, and the smell of cedar and sawdust was so constant in our house that I didn't even notice it anymore until after he was gone and the garage went quiet and I walked in one day and the smell hit me so hard I had to sit down on the floor. We had 2 children. Our son, my older one, is named Jeffrey. He lives in Charlotte with his wife, Pamela. She goes by Pam. They have 3 kids of their own. Our daughter is named Lena. She lives 15 minutes from me with her husband, Craig, and their daughter, my granddaughter, who is 20 years old and in her 2nd year at Virginia Tech. Her name is Brooke. I'm telling you about Brooke because Brooke is the reason I am still here. For the first year after George died, I was just surviving. That's the only word for it. I'd wake up and get through the day and go to sleep and do it again. Jeffrey called every Sunday. Lena came over for dinner most Thursdays. That was my life and I was grateful for it, and I told myself I was adjusting. The 2nd year was when things started to feel off. It was small things at first. I noticed I was tired all the time in a way that felt different from grief tired. I was losing weight without trying. I'd wake up with headaches that took most of the morning to clear. I went to my doctor twice. She ran blood panels, checked my thyroid, adjusted my blood pressure medication. Everything came back mostly normal. She said grief did strange things to the body, and she wasn't wrong about that, but something in me kept saying this wasn't just grief. My daughter was wonderful during this time. She was coming over more often, not just Thursdays, but sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. She'd bring dinner and stay for a couple of hours. She'd help me with things around the house. She set me up with a new bank account online because she said the old bank's app was outdated and this one was easier to navigate. She added herself as a joint account holder so she could help me manage things if I ever needed her to. I thought that was thoughtful. I thought she was taking care of me. I didn't think to question any of it. She was my daughter. Brooke came to stay with me in July, between her spring semester ending and a summer internship starting in August. She'd been staying with me for 3 days when she asked if she could use my printer to print a paper she'd been working on. I said of course, and I showed her where it was, in George's old office at the back of the house, and I left her to it. She came to find me about 20 minutes later with a strange look on her face. She said, "Grandma, did you know there were papers already in the printer tray?" I said I didn't. I never used the printer much since George died. She handed them to me. They were account statements. My account statements, the new account Lena had set up for me. I'd never actually looked at the printed statements because Lena handled all of that, but looking at them now, I could see the balance. And the balance was wrong. Not a little wrong. Very wrong. George had left me in a comfortable position. We had the house, which was paid off and worth somewhere around $490,000 by then. We had savings, retirement accounts, a joint savings account, the proceeds from the sale of a rental property we'd owned for 15 years. After everything, I had come into my widowhood with roughly $340,000 in liquid savings. I knew that number. We had talked about it together before he got sick, George and I, sitting at this very kitchen table, planning for a future we didn't know would only include one of us. The statement Brooke handed me showed a balance of $190,000. I read it 3 times. I thought I must be misunderstanding something. I thought there had to be a transfer I'd forgotten, an investment, some explanation. I sat down at the kitchen table and I said, "I don't understand this." Brooke sat down across from me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How much were you supposed to have?" I told her. She was quiet again for a longer moment. Then she said, "Can I look at the transaction history?" We went to the computer together and she logged into the account with the password Lena had set up for me. The transaction history loaded. Brooke scrolled slowly and I watched the screen and neither of us said anything for a long time. The transfers were regular. They went to an account I didn't recognize in amounts between $4,000 and $9,000, spread out over 18 months so that no single transfer was large enough to trigger a bank alert. 22 transfers in total, nearly $152,000 gone. Brooke pulled out her phone and added it up to be sure, and then she looked at me and her face was very careful and controlled in a way that told me she was trying not to show me how alarmed she was. She said, "Do you know this account number?" I didn't. She said, "Grandma, I think we need to figure out whose account this is before we do anything else." We spent 2 hours that evening going through everything we could find. Brooke found an old paper statement from before the new account was set up, back when I was with my original bank, and we compared balances. We found the original retirement account numbers from a folder George had kept in his office desk, organized and labeled in his handwriting, and I had to take a breath before I could keep looking because his handwriting still does that to me. We found that 2 of the 3 retirement accounts now listed Lena as the sole beneficiary, changed about 14 months ago. My signature was on the change forms. I did not remember signing them. That was when Brooke closed the folder very carefully and looked at me and said, "I need you to not call Mum tonight. Can you do that?" I said, "Brooke, tell me what you're thinking," she said. "I'm not sure yet. I need a day to look at this more carefully before anything else happens." "Will you trust me? I'm her grandmother. I have trusted her since before she could walk." I said yes. That night I could not sleep. I lay in the bed that George and I had shared for 38 years, and I stared at the ceiling, and I tried to build a version of events that made sense, a version where there was an explanation that didn't mean what I was afraid it meant. George used to say I was an optimist. He used to say it like it was one of the things he loved most about me. I lay there in the dark, trying to use that optimism, and it kept failing me. The next morning, Brooke was up before I was. She'd been on her laptop for hours. She'd found a phone number for the receiving account by cross-referencing the routing number, and she'd looked up the business registration for the LLC that account was registered under, and the registered agent for that LLC was Craig, my son-in-law, Lena's husband. She showed me everything, step by step, the way you'd explain something to someone you wanted to be very certain understood. When she was finished, she said, "I'm so sorry, Grandma." I didn't cry right away. I think I was in shock. I just sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, and I looked at the window and at the yard outside and at the garden bed George had built for me the summer before his diagnosis, the one with the stone border he'd set himself. And I thought about how much I had trusted my daughter, how I had let her set up that account because I trusted her, how I had let her help me because I trusted her, how every Thursday for 2 years she had come to my house and eaten dinner with me and asked me how I was sleeping and told me she was worried about me, and I had felt so lucky to have her, so loved the headaches, the fatigue, the weight loss. I looked at Brooke and I said, "The supplements." She said, "What?" About 8 months ago, Lena had started bringing me supplements, a multivitamin, she said, and something for sleep. She'd read an article, she said. She was worried about my energy levels. She brought them herself in a little weekly pill organizer, and she'd refill it when she came on Thursdays. I had been taking them faithfully because she asked me to, because she was my daughter, and she said she was worried about me. I went to the bathroom and got the pill organizer from the medicine cabinet and brought it back to the kitchen and set it on the table between us. Brooke looked at it for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Don't take any more of those." She took photographs of everything. The pill organizer, the account statements, the beneficiary change forms, the transaction history, the LLC registration. She was methodical and calm in a way that 20-year-olds are not usually calm, and I watched her and thought about the fact that George would have been so proud of her, is so proud of her wherever he is. Then she sat back down across from me and said, "Here's what I think we should do. I want to address something here, because I know when I've told parts of this story to people, the first question is always, why didn't you go to the police immediately? The honest answer is that I wanted to be certain before I did anything I couldn't undo. Lena was my daughter. I had held her when she was an infant. I had sat up with her through ear infections and heartbreak and the loss of her father. If there was any explanation, any at all, I needed to find it first. Because once you call the police on your child, that door doesn't close again. Brooke understood that. She didn't push me. She just helped me gather every piece of evidence we could before we made any decision. We took the supplements to a pharmacy that afternoon. I told the pharmacist I'd found some pills I couldn't identify and asked if she could help me. She looked at them and told me 2 of them were not what they were labeled as. One was a sedative, the kind typically used to treat anxiety, not sleep, and not typically recommended for someone with my blood pressure medication. The other she couldn't identify by sight and recommended we have analyzed. I sat in a car in that pharmacy parking lot and I felt something I don't quite have a word for. It wasn't just grief or rage or fear, though it was all of those things. It was something more specific, the feeling of realizing that the story you have been living in is not the story you thought it was. That the person who came to your house and ate your food and hugged you goodbye at the door had been, the whole time, playing a different role than the one you believed she was playing. My daughter thought I was going to die, not die the way people die, of age, of illness, of their time coming. She thought I was going to die the way that would be convenient for her, sedated and disoriented, in a house that would then be sold, with accounts that had already been quietly drained, with retirement funds that already carried her name. Craig had set up the LLC. Lena had handled the implementation. It had been 18 months in the making. Brooke took me to a hotel that night. She told Lena, when Lena texted, asking if she wanted to come for dinner the next day, that she'd already left, that she'd driven back to Blacksburg early. Lena texted me that same evening. Then she called again. I watched my phone ring 3 times and did not answer it, and thought about how many times I had answered her calls without hesitation, thinking she was calling because she loved me. Brooke had found an attorney by the next morning, a friend of a friend who specialized in elder financial abuse. We met with her in her office and spread everything out on her conference table, and she went quiet in the way that professionals go quiet when they're looking at something serious. She said, "You have documentation for all of this?" We did. She said this is a strong case. She helped us contact the police in a way that moved things quickly. The financial fraud alone, the transfers, the unauthorized beneficiary changes, the LLC, was enough to open a criminal investigation. The supplements were sent to a lab. The results came back showing the presence of a compound in one of them that had no business being in a sleep supplement. Something that in combination with my blood pressure medication could, over time, cause the exact symptoms I had been experiencing. And in the wrong circumstances, in high enough concentration, worse than that. I want to be careful about what I say here, because the legal process is still ongoing as I record this, and my attorney has advised me to stick to what has been established in court. What I can tell you is that Lena and Craig were both arrested. They were both charged. Jeffrey flew in from Charlotte when I called him, and he sat across from me at that same kitchen table, and he cried in a way I hadn't seen since his father's funeral. and he kept saying he was sorry. He didn't know. He should have known. And I put my hand over his and told him there was nothing to be sorry for. You don't know what you're not looking at. There is a moment in that courtroom I keep returning to. The judge was reading the charges and I was sitting a few rows back, and Lena was at the defense table, and at one point she turned and looked at me. I don't know what I expected to see in her face. I think I was hoping for something, shame maybe, or grief, or the face of the daughter I knew before any of this. What I saw was something cooler than that. Something that told me she had already made her peace with this version of events, had already constructed a story where she was not the person the charges said she was. I looked away first. I looked down at my hands, at George's ring, which I still wear on my right hand, and I thought about the garden bed with the stone border, and the smell of cedar and sawdust, and the fourth graders I had taught for 31 years who are adults now, with children of their own. And I thought, I am still here. Whatever she was counting on, it didn't happen. I am still here. The house is still mine. I had an attorney review every document and every account, and what could be recovered has been recovered, and what couldn't, well, I'm 68 years old and the house is paid off and my Social Security comes in every month, and I've lived carefully for a long time. I will be all right. What I did not expect was to find the old cedar chest. It was in the back of George's closet, which I hadn't fully sorted through. I had been putting it off. The way you put off things that are going to cost you something emotionally. Brooke helped me go through it a few weeks after everything had settled a little. Inside the chest there was a box of letters and old photographs and a leather-bound notebook I'd never seen before. George's handwriting in his precise, careful script. Notes and observations and small things he'd noticed and wanted to remember. The last entry was from 3 months before he died. It said, "Harriet is going to be okay. She's stronger than she thinks she is. I need her to know that." I read it twice. Then I handed it to Brooke, who was sitting on the floor next to me in a pile of old photographs, and she read it, and her eyes filled up, and she reached over and took my hand without saying anything. We just sat there together in the quiet of George's closet with the faint smell of cedar still coming from the wood of the chest, and I felt, for the first time in 2 years, that I knew exactly where I was. Some people have asked me if I could ever forgive my daughter. I've thought about it seriously because I'm a serious person, and she is still, technically, my child. And the question deserves more than a quick answer. Here is what I've arrived at. I can reach a place where I don't carry the anger anymore, because I've seen what that costs and I'm not willing to pay it. But forgiveness, in the sense that things return to what they were, that's not something I can offer. The person who came to my house on Thursdays and refilled my pill organizer and told me she was worried about me, I don't know who that person was. I thought I did. I was wrong. What I know is this: Brooke came to visit for 4 days and stayed for 3 weeks. She called her internship supervisor and explained there was a family emergency and could she start 2 weeks late, and they said yes. She sat with me through attorney meetings and police interviews, and the first night I had to sleep in that house after understanding what had been happening in it, she drove me to get a new bank account at a different bank with only my name on it. She went through George's workshop with me on a rainy afternoon in late July and helped me figure out which of his tools to keep and which to donate. And she kept picking up his hand planes and turning them over in her hands and saying, "These are beautiful," with this expression on her face that he would have loved. Before she left, she said, "I'm going to call you every day." I said, "Sweetheart, you don't have to do that." She said, "I know I don't have to." She has every single day since then. I am telling this story because when I was in the middle of it, I felt very alone in a way that was specific to this kind of betrayal. Not the loneliness of grief, which I knew, but the loneliness of not knowing who was safe to talk to, of not knowing which version of my own life was true. If you are somewhere in that feeling, I want you to know that you are allowed to ask for help. You are allowed to look closely at things that don't add up. You are allowed to trust the people who show up for you at 11 o'clock at night and sit with you in the dark. And I want to say this too, for the people who are wondering why I didn't see it sooner. Loving someone makes you want to believe in them. That is not a weakness. That is the cost of caring, and most of us pay it our whole lives without ever having to learn how much it can cost. I was lucky in the end that the cost I paid was recoverable. George's cedar chest is in my bedroom now, at the foot of the bed. Some nights I rest my hand on the lid before I go to sleep. It is smooth and cool, and it smells faintly of the wood, and it's the closest I have to his presence in the room, and I find that it's enough. Brooke called this morning. She'd finished an exam. She sounded happy. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Her roommate, a restaurant she'd tried, a book she thought I'd like, and at the end she said, "How were you sleeping?" I told her the truth. I said, "Better." I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, not just the legal part, not just the practical scramble of accounts and attorneys and police reports, but the quieter, harder question of how something like this is even possible, how a person ends up here. What I keep coming back to is this: the things that made me vulnerable were not weaknesses. I trusted Lena because I had spent 40 years building a relationship worth trusting. I let her help me because I had raised her to believe that family takes care of family. I didn't question the pills or the account or the paperwork because I was grieving, and grief has a way of narrowing your vision down to just getting through the day. None of that was foolishness. That was love, doing what love does. But here is what I've learned about love since then. It has to be honest about what it sees. The most loving thing Brooke did for me was not comfort me. It was refuse to look away from something uncomfortable. She was 20 years old and she was sitting across from her grandmother, and she had to decide whether to show me something that would change everything. And she chose truth over peace. That took a kind of courage I don't think I fully appreciated until I understood what it cost her. The choices Lena and Craig made didn't happen overnight. That's the thing about a slow betrayal. It's constructed, piece by piece, decision by decision, each one slightly easier than the last because you've already made the one before it. The first transfer was probably the hardest. By the 22nd, it was a habit. That's not an excuse. That is how people become capable of things they once would have said they could never do. Every choice shapes the person making it, and not always in the direction they intend. I think about the version of Lena who was 8 years old and used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and present them like they were roses. That child existed. She was real. I am not going to let what happened erase her from my memory, because she is part of my story too. But I also know that children become adults and adults make choices, and I am not responsible for the choices she made. Understanding that, truly understanding it, not just saying it, took me longer than I expected. What George wrote in that notebook, that I was stronger than I thought I was, I believe he meant it as reassurance. But I think now it was also just true. Not because I'm exceptional, but because strength isn't something you have ahead of time. It's something you find out about when you need it. I found out about mine sitting in a pharmacy parking lot in July, trying to understand what I was holding in my hands. I found it when I walked into that attorney's office and spread everything on the table. I found it every morning I got up and kept going. If you are somewhere in a situation that doesn't add up, I want to tell you directly you are allowed to look closer. You are allowed to ask hard questions of people you love. The fact that you love someone is not a reason to ignore what you're seeing. It is, if anything, a reason to take it more seriously. The people who deserve your trust will not fall apart when you examine things carefully. Only the ones who are counting on you not to look. Brooke called this morning, like she does every day. That is what the other side of this looks like. Not perfect, not without loss, but honest. I'll take honest every single time.